Good afternoon. I'm Danae Bezantakou, CEO of Navigator Shipping Consultants and concept founder of Yes Forum that empowers this panel. I would like to thank the organizers and Mr. Simeon Chamokos for inviting us to speak about shipping and new normal, and the distinguished speakers of this panel for accepting the invitation. 2020 will remain in our memory because of the global health crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic on all aspects of our lives. This is certainly true for shipping also, which exists to facilitate trade and the maintenance and improvement of global living standards. In spite of the many restrictions imposed by local authorities in response to COVID-19, shipping did not stop even for a day. Shipping companies and seafarers continued to keep trade moving, transporting the energy, food, raw materials, and manufactured products on which 21st century life depends. Before beginning the discussion, I would like to present you some facts about the Greek shipping miracle. Greece remains the world's largest ship-owning nation and the only non-Asian country among the top 5. The country accounts for only 0.16% of the world's population. Greek ship owners own 20.67% of the global tonnage and 58% of the European Union controlled tonnage, with more than 4,000 vessels. And all this in just 40 kilometers. I would like to welcome very quickly the speakers of this great panel. Alexia Inglessis, Director of Alberta Shipmanagement Ltd. Miliou-Theocharaki, Commercial Manager of Theos Shipping Corporation. Roberto Coustas, Co-founder and CEO of DeepSea Technologies. And Christos, CEO of Interunity Management Corporation. Thank you all for being with us. Some of you online, and Christos is with us. So we will speak about history, human element, innovation technology, energy, and capital model. And let's start very quickly. So, Alexia, the first question to you. Greek shipping is a result of hard work and love for the sea. What are the milestones of the past 200 years of Greek shipping, and what is the key fact that keeps us in the first position globally for 50 consecutive years?
Thank you, Danae. I'm very happy and honored to be on this panel. As you said, Greece accounts for only 0.15% of the world's population, and yet has managed to control 18% of the world's fleet and over 50% of the EU fleet. I believe this has been achieved due to multiple factors. First of all, it's important to note that Greek shipping has a history of thousands of years. As a result, a vast amount of information and know-how has been transferred from generation to generation, and Greeks are in a position to correctly evaluate risks and seize opportunities. The country's geography itself has encouraged people to go to sea, as the land's natural resources are limited. Furthermore, Greek shipping has always been quick to adapt to changing circumstances, regardless of national or political conditions. Greeks have developed an extensive global shipping network, which has strengthened their position through both access to cargoes and credit facilities, and has also allowed for the transmission of new ideas. Greeks have always sided politically with democratic powers that have played a significant role in international military conflicts, and these relations have always helped Greek shipping. Finally, I believe this tradition has been incorporated into the Greek state, and the Greek government has provided a practical framework for Greek shipping that has proved to be a win-win situation for all sides. So turning to the milestones, I'll start a bit earlier in 1774 with the Treaty of Kytoukainerti, signed between the Russian and Ottoman empires, as this allowed for Greek vessels to fly the Russian flag and move freely between the Black Sea, Turkish Straits, and into the Mediterranean. Additionally, Greeks then emigrated to coastal cities around the Black Sea, creating strong maritime centers connected to the supply chain. The second milestone I'd like to mention is Greek shipping's contribution to the War of Independence of 1821 through trade, raids, and by joining the Navy, as the Greek merchant fleet was used to navigating the Mediterranean waters that were filled with pirates, and the seamen were used to fighting. Towards the end of the 19th century, Greek shipping managed to successfully transition from sailing ships to steamships, mainly through partnerships. In both World Wars, Greek shipping's contribution was crucial in assisting the Allied forces. In the aftermath of World War II, Greek shipping lost over 78% of its fleet and managed to rebuild this capacity through the purchase of the American-built Liberty ships. These ships were mass-produced for the single purpose of transporting war supplies to the Allies through a single transatlantic voyage. And however, Greeks managed to keep these ships going and operate them efficiently as tramp ships for over 25 years. Later on in the 1950s, Greeks used flags of convenience and established offshore companies, creating what is today the global shipping company not connected to a single nation. Greeks then expanded into the tanker business very successfully, correctly evaluating the shift from coal to oil. In the 1980s, Piraeus became a major maritime center, with Greeks relocating there from London and New York. Over the course of the next 2 decades, Greek shipping explored new avenues of growth and finance through IPOs, the issuance of bonds, private equity raisings. And in early 2000, Greek shipping was well positioned to take advantage of China's booming economy. In 2008, even though the world delved into a deep financial crisis, Greek ship owners, well understanding the cyclical nature of the markets, managed to more than double their fleet over the course of the next decade. This leads us to the present day, with Greek shipping having expanded into all sectors of shipping and maintaining its top position globally.
Of course we will. Amalia, how important is human element for shipping?
Good afternoon to all, and thank you, Danae and Delphi, for having me. Shipping depends on the capabilities, actions, and professionalism of the 1.5 million seafarers, the core of human element in our business. Not only ship owners trust them with a multi-million-dollar assets, but the whole industry relies on them for safety of life at sea, protection of the environment, and the sustainability of world trade. Ironically, there's a scarcity of highly qualified, well-trained, and trustworthy seafarers. Those officers that understand the essence of seamanship and the ones that can bridge the chasm between the minimum skills outlined by the International Convention of
I think that there is a problem with the... Are you okay, Amalia? You're back because there was a problem with the internet. Okay.
Oh, apologies. Technology can help by optimizing operational productivity, by using, for example, real-time data, and can potentially even contribute to a decrease in human errors, the main reason for maritime casualties. However, technology will still be managed by humans, and with its increasing complexity, we will need even more proficient seafarers to be able to use it. And this is the so-called paradox of automation. We run the risk of seafarers' skills erosion if they rely on technology only, without using their maritime intuition. For example, what happens if the EGDIS, the electronic charts that help crew on navigation, faces a sudden malfunction? With regards to automation and remote controlled ships, yes, they could be part of the short-term future, but for ferries and for coastal short-haul trades, like in Norway. But when it comes to dry bulk shipping, it's probably going to be in the very long run and in the form of a hybrid structure where trained seafarers remain in control and are assisted by smart technologies. With respect to the human element on shore, most ship management companies have increased the number of captains and engineers with seagoing experience that are employed in the office. And they are an indispensable asset for the company. And their experience enhances the successful communication between the vessel and the office. However, one should be aware that potential over-reliance on onshore personnel, where too much guidance is given from the office, may cause seafarer complacency, which may result in lack of agility and responsiveness in situation of emergency on board the vessel. Last but not least, it's important to mention the necessity of a younger generation entering shipping, embrace gender and background diversification, and always remember the power of mentoring and actual seagoing experience.
Very important, but Roberto will reply now. Do you believe that the pandemic was a factor that brought technology and shipping closer? How did the industry respond to the remote vessels monitoring?
Thank you very much, first of all, Danae, for inviting me to this panel. It's very, very interesting. And yes, I think what we have all seen this past year is just how inspiringly adaptable we humans are. I mean, we have faced a tremendous change in our everyday lives, and we have managed to adapt. And even this panel is a testament to that, with some of us being remote and some of you being physically at Zapio. So in the past year, we have seen shipping companies also adapting to this new reality with remote working and also remotely monitoring their vessels. And this has become increasingly important because superintendent engineers flying all around the world to visit vessels and monitor their operation has become increasingly difficult and even impossible in many cases. And therefore, technology has become, instead of a, let's say, good to have tool, a necessity. Because if you don't have a remote monitoring tool in the age of 2020 and COVID, you really had no clue how the vessels were being operated. And that's why we have also seen a remote, let's say, monitoring surge in interest in the past, let's say, 6 to 9 months, because more companies are realizing the need to have these technologies. But also what's interesting is that after trying this on a couple of vessels, many companies realize the added benefit that this might have. And therefore, the short answer is yes, we have seen a huge surge in interest, and it's very inspiring to see this.
Very important. And now we'll pass the floor to, because I can pass the floor, he's next to me, to Christos. How important is it for the shipping industry to collaborate with the rest of the energy spectrum, and what might the impact of such collaboration look like? How can it be achieved?
First and foremost, we have to articulate what it is that we're solving for. And in my mind, the most fundamental challenge that we have today is the environment. And we also have to consider success stories in the past rather than attempt to reinvent the wheel. One particular reference point in my mind is the 1970s Clean Air Act in the US, which serves a multitude of parallels with today's ambitious targets that have been set in shipping. And it was made possible through extensive collaboration across the entire vertical energy chain. At the same time, it was ambitious to the point of science fiction. To give you a parallel, it required tailpipe emissions to be reduced by 90%. And if that rings a bell, of course, we've set similar targets by 2030 and 2050 for our own emissions. So I think we have to consider what characteristics contributed to its success. First and foremost, it was not only bipartisan, but it was unanimous in its ratification through Congress, but for a single vote. And that in itself signifies that there was a common perception of the urgency to act. And behind that common perception is a common education, a common set of facts. And behind that is a collaborative effort. It's unavoidable. Secondly, it was broad. It did not target a single sector. Rather, it touched on all aspects of the economy. And from refiners to manufacturers to end users, even to the wastage, every sector changed. Thirdly, it followed the science. The Act continues to evolve and continues to ensure that where technology and where demand exists, policy follows to ensure maximum impact. As broad as it was, it cannot be criticized for being a blunt instrument. And fourth, it forged new paths. Massive grants were given to support research and development, create technologies required to support the ambition. So the Act was successful despite a dramatic increase in population, in living standards, in economic growth, and in the number of energy-consuming sources. And it was balanced, and it went to the heart of the issue, rather than focus on just the periphery. And of course, it was the collaborative efforts of the private and the government sectors, and the collaborative efforts within industries that led to a successful outcome. And today, I have the sense that there are many fragmented efforts, many of which may well have admirable goals, and many of which are extremely resource demanding. However, as long as they remain fragmented and there is no common collaboration, I really don't see any of these efforts becoming a substantial movement.
It's not easy, but let's hope that we will make it happen. I will go back to Alexia. And what are the key challenges that lie ahead for the sector, and how can it be best prepared for future shocks based on the lessons derived from the past?
Thank you, Danae. The major challenge I see is decarbonization. With the emissions targets that have been set for 2030 and then 2050, shipping will have to find a new fuel for propulsion. And the most viable solution I see to get us to the target of net zero carbon emissions is the use of nuclear power plants on land or other renewable energy sources on land that will produce some kind of environmentally friendly fuel to use on ships, such as hydrogen or ammonia. An example of this is hydrogen paste, or power paste as it's called, which is an energy-dense fuel that can be stored on board at room temperature and atmospheric pressure, and when mixed with water, provides a fuel that provides a range similar to that of oil, but with zero carbon emissions. Another challenge I see is the continuous evolution of environmental regulations. This makes it challenging to evaluate what technologies are most competitive. And for ship owners to deal with this, they have to invest in new ships that give them the option to apply new technologies, and they have to work closely with the charters to share the exposure. Thirdly, in the recent years, I've noticed an increase in global trade restrictions, and globalization has always helped shipping, so any barrier to global trade poses a challenge. Finally, I would say that the cost base of certain countries outside the EU is more competitive, making it harder for EU-based ship management companies to stay on top of the game.
Of course. Amalia, how shipping managed not to stop even one day during pandemic? The only sector that managed it.
Well, shipping provides almost 90% of world trade. We really cannot afford to stop moving food, provide energy, or the goods that we use daily. When COVID-19 hit the world, the dry bulk market immediately witnessed a collapse in economic activity, with a decrease in demand for construction materials such as iron ore, and a notable reduction in ton-miles of coal. There was pressure on consumer demand and energy price shocks. However, in the second half of the year, we escaped the worst-case scenario, and this was mainly due to the key importing and exporting countries either keeping down the level of infections, such as China, Taiwan, and Australia, or countries non-curtailing their economic activities, such as Brazil and the US. Also, stimulus policies emerging from China, which accounts for about 40% of the dry bulk demand, caused a significant pickup in iron ore and grains. However, the true heroes of this pandemic are the seafarers. They are the ones that kept shipping alive. And unfortunately, we are still witnessing a true humanitarian crisis caused by international and local restrictions, including travel bans, unavailability of visas, suspension of flights, a minimum 14-day quarantine at ports, even selection of crew changes based on last country of visit and origin. Between March and August 2020, only 25% of normal crew changes took place. And even now, there are more than 200,000 seafarers affected by the crew change crisis. Some of them stranded on board vessels, unable to be repatriated, or past the expiry of their contracts. Now, this causes a disharmonized crew, seafarers' fatigue, and an increase in mental stress, potentially leading to more marine accidents. Additionally, onshore shipping people also stopped traveling, which meant minimum training and safety inspections on board, affecting vessel maintenance and causing more deficiencies. Logistical and supply chain delays are still making shipping slower, with evident hurdles at ship repair yards, struggle to secure necessary provisions, cancellations of scheduled dry docks, and even slippage of new building vessels. Now, having said that, the dry bulk market is currently witnessing a post-pandemic investment recovery. There's an evident stock-up of commodities, extreme patches of volatility, and rates have reached 11-year highs. There are healthy flows of iron ore, minerals, and coal, despite the tension between Australia and China, as well as a robust demand for agri-products from China. There is even a speculation of a commodity supercycle. Now, overall, dry cargo volume for 2021 is expected to grow by 6 to 7%. And with the lowest order book since the mid-1990s, we're actually looking forward to enjoying a very healthy dry bulk market.
It's very important, but it's important to say to Roberto, to say to us, how can smart technologies, very, very quickly, because we have to have the last question to Christos and then to wrap up. How can smart technologies and systems help shipping companies maximize their efficiency and profitability? And what are the drivers and barriers that shipping companies are facing, according to your opinion?
Of course, thank you very much, Danae. This is another excellent question. And I'll have to agree with Alexia that I think the primary difficulty and challenge that we're going to face is decarbonization. And now the IMO has set certain targets, let's say that 50% decrease by 2050 or 70%. And these can seem like very daunting targets. And the only way to achieve them seems to be alternative fuels. But what we need to consider is what can we do today and what action can we take to minimize the, let's say, CO2 emissions of our fleet today rather than postpone the problem to the future. And this is where smart technologies come into place. Smart technologies can help us make smart decisions and smart investments to our fleet, and therefore make our fleet more sustainable with the minimum, let's say, economic impact on the company's cash flow. And this is where I believe we will see the greatest surge of decarbonization by combining technology with smart investments.
Very important, and we're closing with Christos because we need money. So how has the capital model in shipping evolved, and what does it mean for shipping companies?
Look, banks haven't quite completed divesting out of their non-performing loans. And the positive cycles that predicated the balance sheet valuations that they were attempting to achieve were never realized. In fact, the inventory of non-performing loans is today greater than it was a decade ago. And although part of that is potentially short-term and due to COVID, shipping still accounts for a significant proportion of that. Clearly, the Hamburg model that was used to serve as a valuation method 10 years ago, it served its course. But the returns and the cyclicality on which it was predicated didn't really apply. To offset this, however, banks have moved bad debt off their books. There's been significant doubling down of investments to reach better average prices, and investors have become much savvier over time. In addition, the repeated quantitative easing that we see, crisis after crisis, pandemic, notwithstanding, has refilled the coffers, and there is significant appetite to deploy funding behind projects, albeit that it's generally more analytical than the typical cyclically driven investment thesis. I think the most significant challenge that we have ahead of us are interest rates, because zero has become the new norm. And yet, it's not, because we all know that it's not sustainable to have interest rates so low for so long. And there's so much residual inventory of NPLs that when interest rates do start coming up, it's going to have a huge impact. So what does that leave us? Of course, traditional banking is always going to have a role in shipping, and appetite remains strong, albeit the traditional banks are actually gravitating more towards less risky appetites and owners that are willing to capitulate with the new transparency requirements and regulations. Financial institutions that have been massive in shipping will also continue to play a significant role. And they actually they're represented in all facets of capitalization, from direct lending, mezzanine financing, equity investments, everything. And we're actually seeing a fusion where financial institutions migrating towards direct lending and banks migrating towards different kind of models like stop loss dumping of their risk portfolio, of their risky portfolio, in order to make that balance sheets more resilient, is something that's more prevalent. I think we're going into an interesting time now in terms of capitalization structure. We have to be cognizant that interest rates can't stay at zero in the long term. And I don't know, I guess we'll see what happens.
And the future will be bright, I'm sure. I would like to thank Alexia, Amalia, Roberto, and Christos for having such a quick chat, for being positive. And I'm sure that we're now all sitting in the same table. Our seafarers must be vaccinated, and the future is very bright. Thank you all for joining the Delphi Economic Forum Shipping in the New Normal panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
Danae.
you.
Thank you.